With the latest agriculture news from across the state and nation, it's time for the AgNet News Hour from AgNet West. Here's your host, Sabrina Halvorson.
Good morning. Thanks for joining us on the AgNet News Hour. I am Sabrina Halvorson here with Lorrie Booher. Good morning, Lorrie.
Well, good Tuesday morning, Sabrina. Thank you.
All right, we have a couple of things to talk about. We have one serious issue that we're going to talk about, and that is the agricultural burn ban. But, I just remembered something that I wanted to mention. Back before the holidays, we were talking about some agricultural related holiday traditions, and one of them was wassailing. And we had talked about, I had mentioned, you hear the song, here we go, wassailing. I never knew what wassailing was, so I looked it up and we chatted about it a little bit. Wassailing is the tradition of back in like some European countries, back in the very early days, this even goes back, predates Christianity, but then was kind of translated into a Christian tradition where they would go and groups of people would get together out in the orchards and sing around the apple trees and like pour apple cider on the roots to encourage growth and a good harvest for the coming year. And then that actually became the early predecessor of Christmas caroling, where you would go out and, you go out and you sing carols around your neighborhood. Anyway, all of this to say, I went wassailing this weekend.
You did.
Yeah.
Fun.
I don't know. Since we had talked about what it was,
Yeah.
I decided, you know what, I'm going to start doing this. So we brewed up some apple cider and we went outside and we did not sing to the trees. That felt a little beyond what I wanted to be doing. But yeah, we had some apple cider and we listened to some music and it was actually really fun. Wassailing,
That's really cool.
I recommend it.
Well, good for you. That's pretty neat.
So see, some of the things that we learned doing on this show, we can then carry on into our everyday lives. So there's my fun update that I forgot to tell you about earlier. So
that's cool. That's really neat. I'm glad you were able to apply that to your life.
yeah, it was fun. All right. So our heavy topic for today, we want to talk about agricultural burning in the San Joaquin Valley. And this is an important topic. And this is one that I know very, very well, having spent 40 years living in the San Joaquin Valley. I can see a couple of sides on this, which is, the case a lot. But with the agricultural burning, I want to just say right out the gate here, I've lived in the San Joaquin Valley for 40 years. I've been around a lot of agricultural burning. I understand the importance of this for farmers. However, I also have chronic asthma that my doctors had linked directly to the air quality in the San Joaquin Valley where I spent all of my life. I also have one child who has some very severe breathing problems as well. And so I can absolutely see the need to restrict some of this burning because while yes, it is an important way for farmers to get rid of some of their, agricultural, I don't want to say scraps, but I'm at a loss for other words, but it does definitely have a public health effect. And that's important to realize and to mitigate. And so there's kind of two sides of this issue, and it's a big one for our agricultural producers.
Yeah, I was actually just reading a little bit when we decided this was our topic on long-term exposure, just what you said that you are personally experiencing and your family members are personally experiencing asthma attacks, acute and chronic bronchitis, premature mortality. Long-term exposure can also reduce your lung function, especially in children, cause premature death. Boy, this is some serious stuff.
It is. It is very serious. And, like I said, I've got chronic asthma. I've had it for decades, and I will always have breathing issues. I have since moved out of the area. I spend most of my time out of the area, although I, am there quite often. But my lung problems will always be with me. My child also, who is an adult now, but she will also always have her breathing problems as well. When she was a baby, she was actually hospitalized for a couple of weeks because of breathing problems. And it was during a heavy agricultural burn time. We live out in out in the country where this is happening too. And so we were a little bit more exposed directly to the agricultural burning. So that said, though, I mean, obviously, yes, it does have a definite public health effect. However, there are we have agricultural needs. We need our food grown, and there are processes that have to be done as part of this. So what do you do with our agricultural waste now? And we're not talking about like trash. We're talking about natural things like grapevines or tree trims, things like that. We're not talking about, they're not burning plastic out in a field somewhere. It's completely different. These are natural items that they're burning, but it is still causing some air pollution.
Yeah, like wine grapes, like the stalks and stalks out of your fields, like you said, the natural stuff, which, as you said, that brought up an interesting point. I'm not a scientist, so I don't know the answer to this. But if you're burning a natural thing, you wouldn't think that those fumes would be so toxic because you're not putting any additives or anything in there. But it
Right.
is.
But it
Yeah.
is. It's still particulates in the that would go up into the air from the smoke. And, I also want to make a clear point too that agricultural burning is not the only issue with our valley air. A lot of it is not even from us. We get a lot of pollution that is blown in from San Francisco, or from that area. It blows in and comes down into the valley and sinks into the valley and stays there. So we're getting a lot of pollution from other areas as well. It's just not a problem that was strictly caused by agriculture. However, it's obviously easier for our lawmakers to control agricultural burning than it is the pollution in the Bay Area. And while we think about that for a quick second here, we do need to take a short break. We will continue talking about this when we get back. This is the AgNet News Hour. I'm Sabrina Halvorson. She's Lorrie Booher, and we'll be right back. Welcome back to the AgNet News Hour. We are taking on the issue of the air quality in the San Joaquin Valley. And as we all know, that air quality there, it can be pretty bad. There are many days where, even back in ancient times when I was in school, we would have bad air days when we wouldn't be able to go out to recess and things like that. We had to stay inside because the air quality was so bad. And that's just, I don't know, that was just a fact of life. I kind of thought it was like that everywhere. I had no idea until, I started expanding my life and seeing other areas that this is not something that other school kids have. Did you grow up with bad air days?
Yeah, we actually did on the Front Range of Colorado.
Yeah.
The mountain range tends to hold in
Mm-hmm.
any of the bad air, it just sits there. So yeah, we had air quality days. They were like on a color code type system.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's the same thing like what we were talking about before the break, that it's not just agricultural burning that's causing the valley's air problems. It's, like I was saying, that pollution that comes in from San Francisco, and settles. And the mountain ranges around the valley, they hold that pollution in and it just settles there. But again, it is easier, I think, for lawmakers to say we're going to take on agricultural burning and stop that issue rather than trying to tackle the enormous issue of air pollution coming from our cities. And
That's a good point.
and that air pollution issue is enormous. And yes, they are trying to tackle it, but that's going to take many more years, I think.
It looks to me like probably at the bottom line, as always, when we talk about any issue, is money. And
Hmm.
so it costs a lot less to just go out and burn your excess from your fields than it does to do other things. Although there is some grant money, but the grant money, we know that doesn't last forever. But grant money
Right.
has been awarded to growers in the valley to try things out, such as chipping and some other technologies that might work. But those are costly for producers, and taxpayers can't afford to continue paying these long-term grants to figure out what other technologies are exactly that will work. So, but at this point, this issue started, it looks like back in the early 2020s, and it has been phased in. And now here we are, but it's not going to go away. So we're going to have to find different technologies really quick, like now.
Right. And I think you kind of misspoke a little bit. You said early 2020s. It was actually the early 2000s, which
Oh,
is what I think you meant.
sorry.
Um,
Sorry.
that this issue started. But and it's just has taken over 20 years to get to a point where it's actually being enacted. They started talking about the law in like 2003, I think it was. And it had, it's something that has taken many, many years to actually get going. But during that time, agricultural waste has been going down too. We are getting better at managing agricultural waste without burning. And farmers are focused on as well, farmers take care of the earth and the environment, and they want to do good. I just truly believe that. Because if they are not taking care of the earth, how are they going to continue to farm, right? We all know that. But it still is an issue of what are we going to do with this agricultural waste if we're not burning it? And again, we're talking about things like grapevines and, old trees that have been taken out, things like that. We're not talking about like burning trash. Agricultural waste is separate from like your household trash. It's not the same thing, but it still does, like you said, they're using some other things like chipping and things like that to get rid of these agricultural waste. But it still brings the question of, okay, if we can't continue to burn it, which does an excellent job of getting rid of it, what do we do with it now?
Yeah. And even if you start chipping, because we do have a little bit of that going on a trial basis in Colorado as well, especially in the forested areas, you have to have a market to take even that chipping too. And there is some markets, but the infrastructure, the whole thing that you need when you come to building markets isn't there yet. So you still have to even dispose of that chipping some way if you don't have anywhere to go with it.
Right. So it's a hard topic. I mean, obviously, we have to have something to do with our agricultural waste. There will always be, as long as there are humans who want to eat, there's going to be agricultural waste. And that's just the way that it goes. But we also do need to be taking care of our air quality and our health, because it does cause a serious problem. Like we mentioned at the beginning of this, in addition to long-term asthma, like I have, like my kids have, other problems like cardiovascular disease, heart attacks, and just so many other health issues that our air quality can have on us. This is one way that we can dramatically improve our air quality. So it's important. It's just difficult.
The other thing that I think of is there are burn permits. I think that's pretty standard in all states. So you can not burn. So they're trying to control not only the time of the year that it burns, because I know there are certain times of the year that's worse than other times of the year to do burning for this reason, but also to try to control how much is going on at one time. But what I foresee happening is that in some instances, it's going to happen regardless of a permit or not. If we get even stricter on those things, it becomes harder and harder to manage those things as well. And then you start taking into account all those little trickle down effects like law enforcement and first responders and such like that. Is there enough of them to be able to go around to control all this?
Right, right. With our air pollution control district, they do a lot of the enforcement, and and they do have people who go around and will check. And then if they get a report of somebody burning when they're not supposed to, they will go out and issue citations and that kind of thing. So yeah, and it takes a lot to actually make sure that everybody's also following the rules. But so it's another complicated issue that we will continue to watch. For now, though, we do need to take another quick break. This is the AgNet News Hour. I'm Sabrina Halvorson. She's Lorrie Booher. We'll be right back.
Welcome back to the AgNet News Hour. Here's Lorrie Booher.
Today, my guest is Dave Booher, and he is the Senior Vice President of MyLand. And we'll be talking more about MyLand here and what you do in just a moment. But first, tell us about you and your background.
Yeah, so I've been in agriculture all my professional life. I'm a Midwest kid. I actually grew up in Illinois and worked most of my life in Indiana. I have experience in the grain industry, seed, grain processing, biofuels. So I've had stints with Ingredion or Cargill, Dow AgriSciences, Bex Hybrids, and then kind of migrated my way out to Arizona with oils division of Shamrock Foods, and then learn more about MyLand and what we've got going on here, really trying to help benefit producers with a scalable option for regenerative practices. And kind of the rest is history now. So great opportunity there. Again, both my grandfathers farmed. My dad worked for the United States Department of Agriculture for 42 years. So kind of in my blood, really didn't have any other thoughts besides being involved in agriculture in one way, shape, or form.
Dave, I know you mentioned in there regenerative agriculture. So talk to me more about what MyLand does.
Sure. So MyLand's a soil health company, and I always say that means a lot of things to a lot of different people. And really what we are is dedicated to improving the soil that producers work with through our unique soil as a service approach. We are very unique in the fact that we use live native microalgae. And so a lot of people are, kind of wondering what that means. And so every soil type has algae present. And so we take soil samples, isolate certain strains of algae, and then use that to help generate activity in the soil through feeding the microbiome. So the algae serves as kind of the basic building block of the food chain, if you will. And we see, changes from biological, physical, and chemical changes in the soil. Talking about things like enhancing soil health, improving soil fertility, looking at soil structural changes, and the goal is to increase soil health and plant health, and then driving increased productivity and addressing ongoing challenges in producers' fields like water holding capacity, nutrient availability, and just quality and product output.
I have to ask, how was it even discovered that algae would be so beneficial and to be brought into researching soil health?
Algae's been used for quite a long time in agriculture. You can go back and research in China, algae being used, but as far as the science behind it in the United States is probably 10 to 15 years old. And so there was actually a discovery of people using it in Arizona here, and then the ability to really kind of hone that process and control specific strains that are desirable and native to that field is really where our founders honed in almost 11 years ago on this process. They saw it being done in a kind of a Wild West form, if you will, and thought, hey, if we could control that and really have something that is native to each field we work with, because you'll hear me talk about throughout this is our soil as a service model, and no two farms are alike is another mantra that we have. And so that's the reason, Lorrie, why we look at treating every field by themselves. We isolate native algae, microalgae from each field that we work with, and then put that back on through the irrigation that the producer uses. So we're putting a system on farm, and then with every irrigation cycle, we're introducing more live native microalgae to the ground. And so that's what kind of helps the microbiome really flourish and makes a lot of these amazing changes in the soil health.
Is the algae something that we typically think about as coming out of the ocean or a lake, or is it something different?
No, and that's a great question, Lorrie, and a common misunderstanding, because we'll have a conversation with growers and they're like, well, I'm trying to get rid of algae, because they think of algae as the filamental long strand that's in a pond or clumpy. And so this algae is very small, so 10 microns, which doesn't mean a lot to the average person, but producers will understand, hey, my irrigation emitters are 125 microns, so this is very small versus what they would see in irrigation. So it's a very small organism that goes in the ground, and so it's kind of, again, microscopic. So it's not what we think about when we think of algae that's growing in the ocean or strands in a pond or a river.
We'll take a break here and continue the conversation with Dave Booher, Senior Vice President of Sales with MyLand. Stay tuned as we learn more about how they use algae to improve soil crop health. Back we come here today. Once again, I'm Lorrie Boyer for AgNet West, and I'm visiting today with Dave Booher, Senior Vice President of Sales for MyLand. As Dave explained before the break, this is a soil health company that uses algae as the primary source of nutrients to help boost soil health. Dave, exactly how is this algae obtained?
Well, so we isolate it from the soil sample that we take from the farmer. And then we have a lab here that isolates it. Then we put a system on the grower's farm, and that's where the soil as a service kind of comes in. So this is a scalable option for growers without having to make a big upfront or CapEx type equipment investment. So we own and operate the equipment, and we just tie back into the grower's irrigation and put the algae that came from their farm back onto their farm as a food source for the microbes in the soil.
Is the algae applied through powder or liquid form?
Liquid form goes back into the irrigation. So we think of kind of a fermentation vessel, if you will. And so we have some that are single. We have systems there's 16 vessels inside a system, and each one of them is producing, the algae that's eventually going to be put into a harvest tank and put back onto the field through irrigation cycles.
Dave, can this technique be used on any geographic area in the U.S.?
Yeah, so today, Lori, we have kind of concentrations in specific geographies. And so we try to build some density because with us owning and operating the system, we want to make sure that the customer gets the best experience possible. So we have service techs that are out in the field on our operations team. And so we've kind of built density in specific geographies. So we're in Texas, Arizona, California, the state of Washington, and then we have a pilot project in Alberta, Canada as well too. And as far as like expansion plans and what's future for us is we do look at opportunities to expand into new geographies as well as increase density in the current areas and working with our existing growers, new growers in those geographies I mentioned. But one key component to that, Lori, is that, right now everything we use goes back through irrigation. So it does have to be an irrigated crop for us to be able to work with the growers. And so if you think about the geographies I mentioned, a lot of those are a little more arid climates. And so vast majority of the crops are irrigated in those geographies.
Dave, what are the crops that this process can be used on?
We have a broad range of crops that we work on. Like in the state of Texas, we're on 20 plus crops ranging from, row crops like corn, sorghum, wheat, cotton, but we're also on, onions, veg crops, melons, pecans. As we move over into Arizona, we're on melons, alfalfa, tree crops. So they're in the southern part of Arizona. There are pistachios and pecans and other crops grown. And in California, citrus, nut crops, tomatoes, and then Pacific Northwest is we see a lot of potatoes, apples, onions, kind of things you would think predominant in some of those geographies. So there, I guess you could categorize some of those as specialty crops, but kind of big crops for the geographies that we're in.
Now, going back to where we kind of started, you said that it improves the crops, it improves the soil. So let's dive into that a little bit more. How so exactly?
Well, really the soil microbe is a fascinating thing. If you think, very similar to to your own microbiome in your gut health, if you think about that, so a lot of similarities between what's going on in the soil. So as we balance the soil microbes and increase activity there, that drives a lot of natural changes in the soil. So microbes feed on products that are released from plants called root exudates, and that gives them a food source to be able to kind of do their thing, if you will. So we see biological changes. So you're talking about increased microbial diversity and count. And with that, we also see increased activity from the microbes that then start to drive other things like formation of aggregates in the soil, which help with soil porosity, which then that relates into water holding capacity, water penetration, the ability to help leach out, salt challenges, which are prevalent in a lot of the geographies that we work in, higher salt levels that come from the water and or fertilizers that are being used, and the ability to kind of leach those salts out of the root zone, kind of helps drive plant health activity there, formation and increase in organic matter content. And really what we're trying to drive is so a healthy soil typically drives healthy plants. And so if we can alleviate a lot of the stressors or the abiotic stress and other things that hit crops, and then we typically see a lot better performance from the crop, because stress in various forms is kind of the key limiting factor for production and quality.
How often do you soil sample then?
Yeah, so for the algae isolation, it's kind of the initial when we start with that farmer. And then as far as us looking at changes in the soil, we do a baseline mid-year and end of year on every growing season.
You read my mind, because I was going to ask you, just based on our conversation today, it sounds like there are a lot of residual benefits to using it.
Correct. Yeah, because if you think about, if it was just algae going out that had been pasteurized or something, valuable as a carbon source, but limited in its activity. And so that's why that's so unique with what we do, being that it's live. So it continues to be the carbon source, but then it's a replicated carbon source. So it's this amplification effect, if you will, in what the benefit for the soil microbiome is.
Can you use it on organic crops?
Yes, and recently we were very spent a lot of time trying to get our service and as an accepted practice, because as we've talked about here, we're not a product. So we can't go the typical OMRI route, which someone would go and become an accepted product. So we worked with certifying bodies, CCOF being one of those, Texas State Department of Agriculture being another one, on what our system is, what our service is, how we benefit, what products are used. And so we have had multiple growers accepted underneath organic systems plans with the MyLand service and system. So yes, we can work with organics. We make a couple minor changes in the product and the process, I should say. It allows the grower to participate in organics, and so which is a great market for us. As you know, sometimes the options for organic growers can be somewhat limited, especially in something that's scalable like this. Many times changes, whether it be organic or regenerative, ask the grower to do a lot of different things. And this is something where the grower does no heavy lifting and can see some great benefits for their soils.
What is next for MyLand, Dave?
We continue to look at innovation. We continue to improve the systems that we put on farm in many ways. One is looking at increasing density levels and efficacy levels of algae. The goal is to continue to produce high value algae to be put back on the farms from the native strains that we isolate there. But I think there is a lot of things that we can delve into from a technology standpoint that will allow our service to just become sharper and sharper.
I want to thank my guests for joining me here today, Dave Booher, Senior Vice President of Sales for MyLand. I'm Lorrie Booher for AgNet West, and stay tuned as Sabrina Halvorson is coming up next.
Welcome back to the AgNet News Hour. Here's Sabrina Halvorson.
For this segment, we are going back to the Almond Conference, which happened in December in Sacramento, and I met with Nicole Galt with the Almond Alliance. I'll let her start off by introducing herself.
Yeah, I am Nicole Galt, and I work with the Almond Alliance of California. We have a grant program, which is the Pollinator Alliance. It is a program where growers are able to sign up, and we have a technical assistance provider that will plan out the bee habitat for them, and we send the seeds out. The main thing that we want to do is plant more habitat for pollinators as much as possible. We're trying to get every penny of our grant into the ground. As of right now, we have about 25,000 feet of hedgerow in California collectively between different growers. And it's really easy. You sign up at pollinatoralliance.org, and you just sign up into the grower portal, and the technical assistance provider will reach out. They'll actually come out to the land, look at the areas that are the best spots for habitat, whether that be conservation cover, wildlife habitat, or hedgerow. And we basically plan everything out, send the seeds and the plants to the grower, and then we really map out like the plan for them. And so after that, then once they get the habitat planted in the ground, they just have to report with their photos, pretty much show proof of life, and then they get a reimbursement for it. So we make it an all-inclusive kind of package deal where they don't have to go out and get the seeds themselves. We make it easy for them, plan it out, do the IMP protocol, and then we try to make it as user-friendly as possible.
So is there a fee for the growers?
No, there's no fee for the growers. And they're reimbursed for their time and material, so labor costs and irrigation supplies. And the cost of the seeds is covered as well. It's pretty good deal.
So this really takes a lot of work away from the grower as far as planning goes, as far as creating a system as to what they're going to do, right? So when a grower first contacts you or the organization, what can they expect?
Yeah, so we'll reach back out to them and ask them if they have certain areas on their land, and it could be spread apart on different parcels. We do offer the grant to different commodities. We are in the almond industry, so we do reach out to farmers in the almond industry, but it's open. But yeah, so we basically reach back out to them, and then they will come out and actually, like I said, look at the areas where the best spots where water supply is good. And from there, they get their seeds and their plants delivered, and then they install. And like I said, the monitoring is the only thing after it that they really have to take care of, and it's 3 years. It's a 3-year commitment to take the photo monitors, and it's on a quarterly basis.
All right. So that's not too much.
No, it's not too terrible.
So, as you said, you're with the Almond Alliance, and of course, this is going out on the radio, so there will be growers of other crops, perhaps not almond growers, who are also hearing this. Can they be involved as well?
Yes. Yeah, we do. We really are just focused on trying to get as much pollinator habitat in the ground as we possibly can. That's our main focus.
So, how can somebody find more information? Is there a website that they can go to?
PollinatorAlliance.farm, and there's information on the page, and then also the sign up. The portal is there for them to sign up. And even if they just want to get information, we can reach out to them, even if they just have questions about it. So they're not obligated once they sign up on the website. So.
So if they just want to get some information, maybe learn a little bit more, it doesn't actually obligate them to becoming part of the program. Okay. Any final thoughts for our listeners out there?
Yeah, we just want to get as much pollinator habitat as possible. It's easy to sign up. It's a fairly easy process, so we're just trying to get the monarchs and the pollinators, the population back up. Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks so much for your time. But again, with Nicole Galt with the Almond Alliance. This is the AgNet News Hour. I'm Sabrina Halvorson, and we'll be back right after this.
Welcome back to the AgNet News Hour. Here's Sabrina Halvorson.
From hurricanes to tornadoes, wildfires, and drought, USDA meteorologist Brad Rippey's top 10 list of weather stories for 2024 is indeed eventful. Rod Bain joins Brad to look at some of the weather events that made the news in 2024 in this edition of Agriculture USA.
In several cases, saying goodbye to 2024's weather and its impacts on agriculture, communities, and livelihoods couldn't come fast enough.
If you look at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's billion-dollar disaster list, we've seen $24 billion disasters in 2024 across the nation.
Many of those billion-dollar disaster events weather-related. But which ones perhaps made the list of top 10 weather events for the year? I'm Rod Bain. USDA meteorologist Brad Rippey joins us as we look at the stories that made his list of the top 10 weather events of 2024 in this edition of Agriculture USA. USDA meteorologist Brad Rippey says in an eventful year of weather and climatic events, he admits difficulty in paring down to create a list of top 10 weather stories of 2024. Criteria that comes to mind when compiling the list.
Realize that a lot of the billion-dollar disasters tend to be severe weather events with very, very localized damage. So if you get one big hailstorm that hits, for example, Texas or Colorado, that can very quickly rack up $1 billion in damage. But the overall impact on, say, U.S. agriculture is relatively minimal. Those type of events don't tend to make the final cut in the top 10 list. We're looking for more of those broader regional to national scale events that really have a huge impact on not just agriculture, but the broader economy at large.
Rippey's list is in no particular order and starts with 4 hurricanes that reached the U.S. Gulf Coast.
What Helene will always be remembered for is the flooding in the southern Appalachians, including Asheville, North Carolina, becoming likely the most costly U.S. hurricane in the nation's history. Hurricane Milton, Category 5 hurricane at one time in its existence, one of the top 10 in the all-time realm of Atlantic Basin storms for both wind speeds and lowest pressure. Damage estimates still being tabulated, but it too could be a $100 billion storm.
2 early season hurricanes joined Helene and Milton on the top 10 weather stories list.
Hurricane Beryl, it struck in early July. It was the earliest Category 5 hurricane on record in the Atlantic Basin. It was a Category 1 hurricane when it moved ashore and eventually moved right across the Houston metropolitan area. Wind speeds of 80 to 90 miles per hour, and eventually spawned a significant tornado outbreak that spread all the way from East Texas into the Great Lakes region. About a month later, we saw Hurricane Debbie move ashore in Florida's Big Bend. It too was a Category 1 hurricane, eventually moved offshore and then came back in as a tropical storm across South Carolina.
Also qualifying among Brad Rippey's top 10 weather stories, wildfires.
The wildfires that tore across the North Texas and western Oklahoma landscape right at the tail end of meteorological winter. February 26th, we saw the origin of many of the fires that eventually burned well over 1 million acres. The western wildfire season of the summer and autumn. We certainly saw quite a few fires in the Northwest and in California in 2024. Overall, and this does include the acreage from the Southern Plains fires, we saw about 8.5 million acres of vegetation scorched across the country due to wildfires, somewhat below the all-time record, which is just a shade above 10 million acres.
Drought coverage is also considered shared a top 10 weather story for 2024.
11.8% of the country in drought on June 11th was the lowest coverage in 4 years. But just a little over 4 months later, we had more than half of the country in drought, 54% by late October. And that was the highest drought coverage in about 2 years.
As were 2 series of tornadic outbreaks.
That late April outbreak resulted in 7 fatalities from 6 individual tornadoes and caused almost $2 billion worth in damages. The outbreak of late May, we saw extremely active weather, 7 deadly tornadoes resulting in 21 fatalities and a price tag of more than $8 billion in damages.
With overarching warmth cross country rounding out the top 10.
Highlighted by the warmest winter on record, and then we finished off with our warmest autumn on record. In between, we had our 7th warmest spring and our 4th warmest summer. You put that all together, January through November, and it turned out to be the warmest first 11 months of the calendar year on record, with an average temperature that was about 3.3 degrees Fahrenheit above the 20th century mean. So we are on track to come very close to the warmest year on record when the final numbers are crunched in early 2025.
This has been Agriculture USA.
China has approved 5 gene-edited crop varieties and 12 types of genetically modified soybeans, corn, and cotton. Reuters says the expanded approvals are intended to boost high-yielding crops, reduce the need for imports, and ensure Chinese food security. The Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Affairs awarded safety certificates to the 17 crop varieties, according to a document on its website. The approved gene-edited crops include 2 soybean varieties and 1 each of wheat, corn, and rice. China mostly imports GM crops like corn and soybeans for animal feed, while cultivating non-GM varieties for food consumption. A ministry document says the safety certificates for the newly approved varieties are valid for 5 years, starting from December 25th of 2024. The California Department of Pesticide Regulation has released its updated schedule for re-evaluating certain pesticides registered in the state. Under state law, CDPR must continuously review pesticides to determine if they pose significant adverse impacts or if further restrictions are needed. This process involves scientific assessments, public workshops, and, if required, regulatory actions such as label changes or cancellations. The new schedule includes several pesticides currently under re-evaluation. For chloropicrin, manufacturers must complete multiple studies by the end of the year. CDPR plans to finish reviewing these studies by 2027. They will finalize any changes by 2029. Cyfluthrin is also under review, with a human health risk assessment scheduled for completion by late 2026. In addition, reevaluations of difascinone and second-generation anticoagulant rodenticides will feature public workshops this year. Both are on track for final decisions by 2026, with potential mitigation measures to follow by 2028. The department is also examining the impact of non-agricultural outdoor neonicotinoids. Draft human health risk assessments for some neonicotinoids are planned for early 2025, and final assessments for these chemicals are expected by early 2026. Should mitigation be necessary, CDPR aims to complete the processes by 2029. The agency is also expecting potential final actions for paraquat dichloride by early 2029. CDPR says it will provide annual progress updates on these re-evaluations. The timetable is intended to give growers, industry representatives, and the public greater clarity and predictability about when final decisions may be made. Read more at agnetwest.com. And that is our show for today. This has been the AgNet News Hour. I'm Sabrina Halvorson. On behalf of Lorrie Boyer and myself, thank you for sharing your morning with us.
To get more information on the topics you heard today, visit AgNet West at agnetwest.com. You can also stay connected by following us on our social media at AgNet West on Facebook, Instagram, and X. Also look for Sabrina Halvorson on Facebook, and be sure to subscribe to our podcast by searching for AgNet West on your podcast app. Thank you for listening to the AgNet News Hour from AgNet West. AgNet West Radio Network, your primary choice for agriculture news.